Your Highness, Israel just signed with Hamas a truce of 4 days and the sparing liberation of 50 hostages. Is it for you a good or bad agreement with this barbaric Hamas people?
Well, first of all, on the humanitarian level, of course, no one can be not relieved to see that families are getting back their loved ones. And that's obviously a humanitarian issue. However, let me just start by saying that this whole concept of hostage taking is not new. It started in Tehran when the US embassy personnel were taken hostage. And we see today that the regime's proxies are behaving in the same manner. That they have learned a lesson as a result of hesitation and weakness from Western governments that it pays to take hostages. Case in point, the recent release of hostages in Iran in exchange for money that was liberated by the current Biden administration. What I'm trying to say here is that if you succumb to blackmail, we better expect more and more hostages to be taken down the line. Which leads us to this issue. It's one thing to try to fight the symptoms. The problem is you have to cure the disease, and the disease is what is the source of all this kind of radicalism and terrorism. And again, it ties back to the chief financier of groups like Hamas, which is of course the regime in Tehran.
According to you, Your Highness, what role has the Islamic Republic played in the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict?
Well, obviously, it was not in the regime interest to see this peace process and the Abraham Accord bear fruits, so they tried to sabotage it. And they have always tried to take credit in this kind of action, but short of taking responsibility and facing the consequences of that. They've always tried to take credit for these kind of actions and somehow got away with not facing the repercussions of it. This has been a tactic, and that's why they have proxy wars, because so far they managed to maintain themselves in power by keeping repression at home and distracting the world to other problems, including regional conflict, and of course, case in point, the recent terrorist attack on Israel. The proxies from the regime are operating day in, day out. They're getting financed, they're getting trained, they're getting equipped with weapons and all that. And this is clearly, why would the regime spend so much money instead of its own people in the region if it didn't have any intentions to utilize at some point these proxies to sabotage any process or create more instability. This has been a tactic that I have applied the past 4 decades, and we see yet another example of it.
According to you, what do the Iranians inside the country, what do they think about the situation? Do they hope it could lead to the fall or the death of the regime?
Iranians have been chanting for years, neither Gaza nor Lebanon may my life be sacrificed for Iran. Well, when they say Gaza and Lebanon, they mean Hamas and Hezbollah or Islamic Jihad. Anything that the regime is using abroad at the people of Iran's expense to conduct its idea of assimilating the world under a religious Shiite caliphate, which is really the ultimate goal that the regime has to defeat the free world. It is at the expense of the Iranian people. So Iranians are always glad to see when the world is fighting back against their oppressor, either directly or indirectly, in this case against its proxies, because they know that everything hangs in a balance. As long as this regime managed to keep itself in power in Iran, there's misery, there's poverty, there's no hope for the future for my fellow compatriots. And this is why I think that the interest of the free world is not to deal with this regime or maintain the status quo. The ultimate solution to everybody's problem, whether it's the Iranian people or the international community, is to put an end to the regime that is ruling my homeland.
Would you say, as late President Chirac said in the past, that Iran is the cancer of Middle East?
It is. Look at the relations Iran had before the revolution with the whole world, including the Soviets and the Chinese. We had a very balanced policy. We had good relationship with our neighbors, the Arab countries, and including Israel before the revolution. Since the revolution in Iran and the taking over of our country by this regime, you have seen nothing but havoc, violence, conflict, instability, threats, terrorism, radicalism, including the nuclear threat. Everything is negative, 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 negative. There's not one aspect that this regime has done that has in any form or shape made lives of people at home better, or for that matter, made the world safer or more stable. It goes without saying, and he was right in designating as such. It is a cancer, and therefore you have to remove the main tumor. If the tumor is in the heart or in the brain, you don't go and amputate a leg or a finger. You have to go to the source. And as I said before, and I repeat it again, the eye of the octopus is in Tehran. What you're doing right now is just fighting the tentacles. We have to put an end to the eye of the octopus. And once that problem is resolved, the world will see relief and Iranian people will be liberated. This is something that is a commonality of interest here. And we are baffled by the fact that to this day, the world doesn't understand that regime change is the solution, not behavior change by the regime.
According to you, how should the US, Israel, and the Western camp address the Iranian regime's threats?
If they come to the conclusion, as I said earlier, that the solution is not behavior change by the regime, but regime change itself, at the ask of the Iranian people, but also logically for them to understand that this is why we have all these problems and we can eliminate all of them at once. In that sense, the policies should shift towards a dual track approach. One would be maximum pressure, which means additional sanctions. I hope Europe will finally make the decision to put the IRGC on the terrorist list, because that would put even more pressure on the regime. Parallel to that, a policy of maximum support. By maximum support, we mean empowering Iranians to equal the playing field. Access to internet, funding labor strikes, helping organizations and civil society orchestrate and equip themselves. These are the kind of things that will bring dual pressure on the regime that will be enough to lead to its downfall, which is the ultimate solution and a win-win proposition for the people of Iran who seek a secular democratic alternative to this clerical dictatorship. And the world will finally be relieved of all the threats that this regime has created ever since its inception.
Your Highness, finally, I don't want to say that it would be a wishful thinking, of course, but what would the Middle East look like with a secular, democratic Iran?
In terms of our national interests, it behooves us to aim towards bringing as soon as possible stability and peace and regional good neighborliness and good cooperation, because that's the only way to achieve prosperity and progress back home. We cannot live in a climate where there's constant tension. On the other hand, if stability is brought back to our region, and it once was like that before the revolution, you can imagine the prospect of the future being really positive in terms of our relationship with the Arab world, with Israel, with our other neighbors. It is conducive to a climate of progress and prosperity, which is what is in everybody's interest, including in my country's interest. It is in that climate that we can all live together and prosper, as opposed to constantly worry about each other, which is really what this regime has created. So I have a very positive optic on the future, and I think that once Iran is liberated, not only the people of Iran will benefit from it, obviously, but our neighbors will clearly immediately see the huge difference between now and a different Iran with a different disposition completely. The opposite of this regime is black and white.
Your Highness, I want to thank you very much for having taken time to talk to I-24 News. Many thanks again. Feel welcome to come back to make some more commentaries about the ongoing development. Many thanks again, Your Highness.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.